Nolan Grant had traveled through many wild corners of the world, but nothing prepared him for the stillness of Harrow Ridge National Park. From the moment the floatplane left him and Elise Forrester on the narrow strip of gravel beside the river, the silence pressed in like a physical weight. Even the pilot refused to linger. He only glanced at the tree line and muttered that he would return in 3 days if the weather allowed. Then he was gone, leaving the two of them alone with their gear and an expanse of untouched wilderness that felt almost offended by their presence. The river moved without a sound, its surface glassy and dark. Cliffs rose in jagged walls around them, and the shadows between the rocks seemed thicker than they should be. Elise adjusted her pack and forced a smile, but Nolan could see the tension in her shoulders. He asked her if she was ready, and she nodded, though her voice was quiet when she replied. She had studied the region for years and believed that certain predators followed strange migration routes that led through Harrow Ridge. Nolan agreed to accompany her because unusual wilderness was his specialty, but even he felt uneasy. The air had a taste to it, almost metallic, and the cold did not seem to bother the land the way it bothered him. Their first day passed in cautious silence. They followed an old trail marked only by faint indentations in the moss. Every so often, Nolan lifted his camera and caught the odd shape of a claw mark on bark or a deep gouge in the soil. Elise took notes and measured prints she could not identify. They were long and narrow as if something walked on 2 legs but placed its weight strangely forward. She tried to explain it away as bare damage, but her tone lacked conviction. As dusk approached, they found a clearing with the collapsed remains of a small wooden shelter. The boards were split outward from the inside, as if something had forced its way through. Nolan hesitated before stepping closer. Beside the ruins lay a rusted lantern, an empty rucksack, and a journal half buried in dirt. He brushed the dirt away and handed it to Elise. The journal was damp, its pages warped, but the writing inside remained legible. The entries grew frantic over time. The unknown writer spoke of a figure seen at the edge of the river at night, tall and motionless, always facing the shelter even in pouring rain. The last sentence made Elise stop reading aloud. She simply handed the journal back to Nolan, her face pale. The final line read, "It waits for the dark because it prefers when our faces cannot hide from it." They built camp far from the ruins. As the fire burned low, strange sounds drifted through the forest. Not the typical calls of wolves or owls but long, hollow notes rising and falling, almost like breath drawn through a cavern. Nolan lay awake for hours, listening to the rhythm of those sounds. They never came closer, yet they never faded. In the morning they continued toward the inner ridge. The trees grew denser, their trunks dark and twisted. Elise found more claw marks, deeper and fresher. Nolan photographed them while she compared them to her field guide, but none of the silhouettes matched anything familiar. Near noon they reached a tall stone outcrop where someone long ago had carved warnings. The words were weathered, but a few were clear. Do not follow the howls. Do not look toward the hollow watcher. Do not sleep beneath the ridges. Elise ran her fingers over the carvings and whispered that the Dean people avoided this place entirely. She wondered aloud why the park had never officially documented these warnings. Nolan did not answer. He was staring at the ground just beyond the rocks. There was a deer lying on its side, its body intact except for the absence of its head. No blood, no tracks, no sign of struggle. Only the clean removal of the skull as if something had taken it without disturbing the rest of the body. Elise stepped back and covered her mouth. Nolan lifted his camera, then stopped. He lowered it again. His hands were shaking. Something moved in the trees behind them, too tall to be an animal and too silent to be human. End of part 1. Nolan and Elise left the headless deer behind them without speaking. The forest felt different now, heavier, as if the trees had leaned in closer. The air smelled faintly of wet stone even though the ground was dry. They followed the trail toward Blackwater Falls, a place Elise claimed had never been fully mapped because the river changed its flow every season. Nolan had read the same reports but never believed them until now. This land felt alive, in a way he could not explain. Near the base of the ridge, they encountered a man in a ranger jacket standing beside a broken canoe. He greeted them with a guarded expression and introduced himself as Deputy Leon Bradford. His uniform was worn and scratched, and he carried no radio. When Elise asked if he was stationed here, he laughed softly as if the idea amused him. Leon said he had been tracking 3 hikers who vanished 5 days ago. Their last known campsite was upstream, but he found no footprints, no embers, not even gear scattered by animals. It was as if the forest had erased all evidence they ever existed. He told them quietly that Harrow Ridge had more disappearances than the official reports admitted. Each case was sealed and lost in paperwork, as if someone wanted to forget the missing rather than search for them. Nolan glanced at Elise, and she looked troubled. She asked Leon if he believed something lived here. Leon took a long moment before answering. He said he had heard things at night that were not human or animal. He said he had seen something tall walking between the trees but had never witnessed it fully, only the shape. He called it the silent thing, because it never made noise when it moved. They continued together, 3 strangers bound by a growing sense of dread. The deeper they walked, the stranger the forest became. The trees grew closer until their branches interlocked overhead, blocking out the sky. Roots twisted like veins across the ground, forcing them to step carefully. The air grew damp and cold. Nolan stopped several times because he felt vibrations through the soil, like distant footsteps. By late afternoon, they reached Blackwater Falls. The river flowed thick and dark as ink, reflecting no light. The waterfall plunged from jagged rocks, but the sound was strangely muted, as if the air swallowed the noise before it reached their ears. Moss smothered the stones, and pale fungus clung to everything. There were carvings on the rocks near the water. Old Dean symbols. Leon translated what he knew. They warned of a valley where spirits fed on faces. Elise swallowed hard and asked if he thought the carvings were meant to be literal. Leon did not answer. They set up camp on a ridge overlooking the river. Night came without warning, the sky swallowed by clouds. The forest grew so silent that even their breathing felt too loud. Nolan and Elise prepared their tents while Leon gathered more firewood. He walked only a few meters into the trees, but he did not return. After several minutes, Elise called out to him. No reply. They followed his path, but the ground showed nothing. No trail of footsteps. No broken branches. No sign of struggle. The forest simply reclaimed him, as if he had stepped through a doorway only it could see. Elise whispered that they should leave at first light. Nolan agreed, but he stayed awake while she slept. He sat near the fire, watching the tree line. The flames flickered, then dimmed without wind. The shadows between the trees shifted. Something was standing there. It was tall, much taller than a human. Nolan could see it only as a thin outline, like a long-bodied figure draped in darkness. Its head tilted slowly, impossibly far, until he felt its gaze resting on him even though he could not see its eyes. The shape trembled as if it was breathing. The air around Nolan grew frigid. He blinked once, and the shape was gone. Nolan woke Elise and told her to pack immediately. She moved without arguing. As she gathered her things, something crashed through the underbrush behind them. A heavy impact, followed by another, coming fast. The ground trembled. The cold deepened. Nolan grabbed Elise's arm and tried to run, but in the confusion and fear, the torch slipped from his hand and rolled down the ridge. Its light spun wildly across the trees, and for a moment, he saw the shape again. Long limbs. A hollowed chest. A head bent to one side as if broken. And something pale hanging from its fingers. As the torchlight died, Elise screamed. She was pulled from Nolan's grasp, dragged backward into darkness. He scrambled after her, shouting her name, but the forest closed in around him, branches clawing his clothes as her scream faded into the silence beneath Blackwater Falls. Nolan ran through the forest blindly, branches tearing at his arms as he followed the fading echo of Elisa's scream. The darkness swallowed sound so quickly that within moments he could not tell which direction she had been taken. The air felt thick, almost damp, as if the forest itself exhaled around him. Every few steps, he thought he heard her voice again, but the tone was warped, stretched, as though something was imitating her rather than calling for help. He forced himself to stop and breathe. He remembered the Dean carvings near Blackwater Falls, warnings etched by hands long gone. Spirits fed on faces. Do not sleep beneath the ridges. Do not follow the howls. Yet now all he could do was follow the voice, even if it was no longer her own. The forest opened into a narrow ravine lined with stone pillars that rose like the ribs of some ancient beast. The moonlight barely reached the ground, but Nolan saw a path between the pillars leading downward. A faint glow pulsed in the depths of the ravine, soft and sickly. He gripped his flashlight and descended. The path grew slick with moss. The glow strengthened until he realized it came not from any lantern or flame but from bioluminescent patterns etched into the stone walls. Spirals, lines, and scratched silhouettes of human heads without faces. The carvings were fresh, not ancient. They looked carved by fingernails. Farther in, Nolan reached the mouth of a cavern. The glow from inside flickered like distant lightning. As he stepped through, he felt the temperature drop sharply. The cavern was vast, with a ceiling so high it disappeared into darkness. And on the ground near the entrance lay scraps of fabric from Elisa's jacket. He called her name. His voice echoed unnaturally, bending back at him as if the cavern repeated it with a warped mouth. Something moved deep in the shadows, dragging a long limb across stone. He shone the flashlight forward and followed the trail of torn fabric. The cavern split into winding tunnels. Nolan chose the center one, guided by faint markings on the walls. These were no longer carvings but gouges, deep and frantic, as though dozens of hands had clawed the rock in an attempt to escape. The sound of dripping water echoed, accompanied by a low whisper that almost resembled breath. Far ahead, he heard movement. Not shuffling, not footsteps, but the slow scrape of something being pulled. He turned a corner and froze. Elise was there, sitting against a stone pillar, her knees drawn close to her chest. She looked dazed, her eyes unfocused. Nolan rushed to her, kneeling beside her, but she flinched as if she didn't recognize him at first. Then she whispered his name in a trembling voice, telling him they had to leave immediately. Before he could ask what happened, she pointed deeper into the cavern. Nolan turned his flashlight. For a second, he saw nothing. Then something detached itself from the wall. It was tall and thin, its limbs bending at strange angles. Its skin looked stretched, almost translucent, and its ribs jutted outward like branches. Its head tilted as though its neck could no longer support it. The face was the worst part. There was none. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Only smooth skin where features should be. Yet Nolan felt its gaze like a weight pressing into him. In one elongated hand, it held something pale and round. Nolan realized with horror it was a human skull stripped perfectly clean. Elise whispered that it was the Hollow Watcher, the spirit the Dean feared. She said it did not kill for hunger. It stole faces to wear them, to remember the ones who wandered its valley. She said she had heard the voices of the lost whispering through the tunnels, begging her to run. The creature took a step toward them, silent and deliberate. Nolan pulled Elise to her feet, and they ran back into the tunnels. The cavern twisted around them, passages shifting like a maze designed to trap them. The whispers grew louder, merging into a chorus of desperate breaths. The ground shook as the Hollow Watcher followed, impossibly swift. They reached the entrance passage, but the opening ahead was not as wide as before. It seemed narrower, as if the cavern was closing in. Elise stumbled, and Nolan grabbed her, dragging her forward as the creature's shadow stretched along the wall behind them. They burst out of the cavern just as a cold wind slammed through the ravine. The Hollow Watcher reached the entrance but stopped, unable to cross the threshold. It extended one long arm, pressing its faceless head against the gap, as if memorizing them both. Then it retreated into the dark, the glow fading with it. Nolan and Elise climbed the ravine in silence. They did not speak until they reached the treeline, where dawn finally touched the horizon. A distant rumble echoed through the forest, like a warning. The float plane never returned for them. When search teams eventually arrived weeks later, they found no sign of the two researchers. Only a single camera lay on the riverbank, its last photo showing a tall shadow standing beside the stone pillars, watching the forest with a face it had not yet found.